Hello and welcome to another modelling video. This is Alan from the Makona Man at YouTube with another 3D printing presentation. This is the second video covering the SparkMaker SLA 3D printer, the cheapest one you can buy on the market. For those who are not familiar with the character, the mashup of Pikachu and Sonic made by Christine Weston Chandler. She is an artist online who's very controversial and sort of gets a lot of attention due to the wrong reasons of interacting with the trolls, releasing information, that sort of thing. There's a 20-part documentary, an hour piece out there if anyone's interested in someone's life falling apart on camera and being fully documented. Turning back to the SparkMaker, going to do some commission, and we're doing some train stuff. Now I find if you want to have a smoother print, you can actually leave some of the resin slag on. It fills up the steps and putties it, but you get some shallow detail. If you want detail very sharp, like the mold I made here, unfortunately it got too smoothed out and far too hollow for what I want, so this would need to be sufficiently cleaned in alcohol. This you could pretty much almost cure as is, but I want those panels to be a bit deeper. Put the links in the description section and you can see it's already cleaning up very nicely. I could pretty much cure that right now. If I wanted to show all the steps, warts and all, I would scrub it with a toothbrush. I'm going to keep printing, so we'll leave the bed dirty. I find the dirty bed etches a lot better than a clean bed. And what I like to do when the bed's been sitting around for a while, I drain all the resin out, mix it in a jar and put it back in. Instead of using the shot glass where I wasted a lot of resin, I've been using a liquid syringe, which I got from an SLA Facebook group. A very handy tip. We'll go on about how expensive it is to print in resin, SLA, all that sort of stuff. With shipping, half a litre is $50 Australian. I found that half a litre is 700 grams. Now when I've done a price analysis, it's probably about 8 cents per gram. So this part has costed me practically less than $1. Now I'm going to be doing some commissions and selling some prints to my friends to enrich their hobby, and they've got access to a machine and expectations or expertise from me, as well as put a little extra dosh in my pockets for my projects. And it's a bloody good deal considering that a print like this is almost $30 from Shapewaves and other similar services. Now it's going to be far more accurate and a far better print, but hey, with my mates, about 10-20 bucks and they can have about dozens and dozens of little parts like this. For a mate doing a Thomas the Tank Engine rig, this one failed. I had the bed here, it dropped off into the bed and just pancaked, so I just kept printing here and not wasting any more resin. I'll give it to him anyway because he might be able to clean it up, reuse it and mount it on a thing, and you can check out how cool that tiny detail is. And he actually drew this model with advice from me on Tinkercad. I can't stress enough that these $10, $20, $30 nail UV curers really do the trick in getting these models done. And it's just the right size for what we need. Anything bigger you'd have to make a specialty tank. Two to the left worked out, except I snapped one. The one on the right is also pancaked. Just learning about what I need to add supports and what I need to add bases to. Doing a big cleanup. Never actually considered doing this. This is pretty cool. Beautiful thing when a print fails, especially if really early, minimal amounts of retail material is wasted. This is the collection of parts for the commission done, weighing at only 22 grams in resin, so you're looking at a cost of $5. The counter cleaning, which does take a few grams per tank, do multiple tanks before cleaning, as well as failures, and the failures is 2 over. and your personal projects involved as well. As you get better and things are tighter, you'll fail a lot less. We're looking at about 12 hours in, and we're not even halfway through. Getting close to the 24-hour mark, and it's looking really, really good. A reminder to keep the red dome on, as it blocks UV rays from natural sunlight, some forms of artificial light, as to not build the skin or disturb the resin tank. We finished the print a good 24 hours ago and just stored the resin in there for a bit. From my reading on the SparkMaker forums, as well as other SLA and UV printing forums, that you could store it like this for quite a while. You don't have to clean up every time, as long as the weather's not too warm or hot. Like to give a bit of a clean down. Another thing I found out, not reading the instructions too well, is mid printing, or at least with the new printers, the SparkMaker can actually pause, so you can check on the quality and stuff. Though when it resumes, it sort of does something funny and leaves a line where it starts to pause. It's probably best to just risk it and let it keep printing, and only abort if you notice something is drastically wrong. But if it generally pancakes or it drops off the platform and sits there, it will not waste any sufficient material, only time. So we're just about to do an unreveal and see what this guy looks like. Here is our little Sonic character figure, and the printers come out really nice. The stepping is not bad whatsoever. We did do it for a longish exposure at the finest resolution on the Z-axis humanly possible. The thing with the SparkMaker slicer is you can design your own supports, and instead of going with the auto generate, which went absolutely crazy, any of the spines of the hair and the tail, I just gave a few sticks, and so the feet would not be stuck to the rafts. Also added a ton of supports there as well. Nothing has lifted. I would say this is quite the successful print, and we're going to only be using some flush side cutters. The resin is still very soft, it's not yet cured, and as long as you clean your side cutter, something like a Tamir or the U-Star, not the God Hands, you're able to remove it, and it's just so soft it just slides right through as such. It'd be best to pry it off the base with raft and wash it in methylated spirits or isopropyl alcohol, but we've got an idea what the body looks like. Majority of the waist supports. The platform is nice and clean for the very next print, as the resin is a bit old and they do go out of date, thicken up over time. I've also stirred the vat up a bit, which had wavy lines through it. The material separated and would have resulted in a failed print. All the tutorials recommend isopropyl alcohol. I've done that. It's quite expensive where I am, so I utilised methylated spirits instead, and it did just a good job, and I can actually really give it a good soak. To be a bit extra cheaper, I also reclaim the same metho for washing in general. So it looks a bit dirty, but I'm going to keep using it until it just seems to be a lot less potent. I could leave it in there for easily about 20 minutes, an hour or so. Pull it out, clean it up further as it's still soft. As evidence of the softness of the material, just supports break off. And any thin parts, such as the tail or the arms and legs, if crushed, put under any significant pressure, will definitely snap. It will require UV curing to be as hard as humanly possible, and it'll be quite rigid with the slightest bit of flex as not to break. We are definitely slowly getting there. All cleaned up, weighing in at about 20 grams. I suppose the supports had only been 2 more grams extra. And I used the Anycubic as mentioned in the review for the printer. It was recommended via the SparkMaker users not to use their in-house resin as it is a lower quality. And a lot of them seem to be using this brand or some other generic make. This was a bit expensive at about $50 a bottle when I bought everything together, but as it's being wholesaled and retailed in Australia now, it's $30 shipped straight to my door. Note on the model, this spine or rear spine has gone flat, as well as under the knuckles. Nothing terrible. It looks absolutely good standing upright. I guess it was my fault with the supports and exposure time. He also can't stand on his own. We may have to print a wargaming base for him. It has some sort of light tube inside. The UV is strong enough that it bakes this at the 400 wave curing limit. I understand some of the LEDs you can get on eBay and whatnot are not quite strong enough, but actual curing mechanisms or devices for things like nails and any other beauty or art products would do the job. Eventually when I get around it, I'll probably pull this apart and rebuild it into a larger UV tank with tin foil on the inside, but being a fluorescent style tube, I might hold off on that and look for a product with built-in LEDs to completely pull apart, opposed to building something myself and wiring it where I risk getting generic LEDs that are just not quite strong enough. There's a lot of talk and discussion about over curing or under curing. It'll still feel sticky and soft if it's not quite strong. If it's nice and rigid and actually strong enough to sand, which I do sand these, it's all go. Maybe the clears and the light colors could get brown markings or discolored. Not a problem for me or us as we paint them, being scale modelers. But from my experience of putting it in for too long, walking away and coming back hours later, it just reaches certain points of hardness. By complete mistake, I've left the model inside the curing tank for well over 12 hours. And no damage, brittleness has occurred. So that pretty much alleviates any theories and rumours. Applied some putty in some areas where there's imperfections such as nub marks and really over exaggerated stepping. A selection of sandpaper to start touching up the surface, and also one of my wargaming bases, 3.5mm high by 50mm. For pin vise we marked out and drilled a couple of holes all the way through. Very, very tough material, probably be easier before curing. I've also found the last few layers just burst out, probably because it wasn't cured properly in between the layers. Exit wounds is something to be definitely worried about. We'll brass pin the figure right on top. Next we're going to sand the puttied areas and the whole thing in general to make any sort of Z-axis lines far less obvious. Being resin, dust is fairly toxic and acid. So just wet sand. We're going to remove the putty in the areas first, which will take a while, and just everywhere where we see lines, we're just going to give it a bit of a buff. Now some areas, as we just saw, is very brittle, and the arm did a nice clean break off. So we're going to have to be very, very careful. We shall glue this back on with super glue once everything is finished. Got them all mounted, but we've also done a separate print at wargaming scale through the SparkMaker. The face details is a tad shallow, but I think that's more so issues with the model. Pins glued underneath the feet. All rigged up for painting. The base and model has been primed via airbrush with Tamiya primer. It looks pretty good, no major imperfections, though the back of the spine still has visible nubs that can be trimmed up and sanded further. The low poly of the design of the model is also visible with some of the print lines, which will require another sanding session followed by a final primer. By mistake I left the UV curing tank on over day and night, and this white scum has built up. Hasn't made any texture difference, but for people who just appreciate prints with no paint on it whatsoever, this is a big no-no. As it's going to be painted, not a big deal, but it's interesting to see that over curing is a thing. Scale model range, easy to scale once you use a scale converter. Google that, there's a scale model one. We've got 120 Mush & Krieger, 35th and 72nd for tanks. This is just your standard 20 litre jerry can. With a sufficient amount of drying time, a few days required, I left it for a full week. I'm going to give it a very good scrub with this range of sandpaper. Lightly with the high grit, very hard and stern with the lower grits, and remove all that primer and some of the stepping for a smooth finish. Sanded as much as I can. I did disturb some paint when I airbrushed him last on the cheek. That got sanded out, but being a low polygon model, a lot of those hard edges need to be removed, so it's far more smooth now. Those very thin appendages are hard to work around and they snap, but I think it's just the flaw of the character design more than the print. Started the airbrushing process, and you can see that it's pretty smooth from the gloss sheen. Two-tone of yellow, nice and vibrant, working out. We also flocked the base. At this stage I've gone through about a litre of resin, and I've done quite a few models via commission for friends and locals. Picked up a few tricks with other unusual shapes, mostly very heavy ones with thick bases and heavy ends. They do have a tendency with the incorrect supports to just break off, hang and distort heavily, or just drop into the tank. Luckily they waste very little material if they drop off quite early, so I was advised to use as thin supports as possible for easy removal. Sometimes where it's easy to break off or cut with nippers, it's advisable to use thicker supports in some areas just to hold everything in together. I've done this print twice. It's a number of wargaming miniatures, and it just fails at this point. I find the bed hits the very top of the printer, and it's constantly trying to go higher and higher for some reason. It has distorted the file, and it just cuts out at this exact layer. So it's something I have to revisit and completely support and process all over again. Hand painting is completed. Put a few layers of matte clear and present the finished model. We have the little guy in the booth ready for photographing. We now have a finished model. I remembered learning with the Upper Mini additive or extrusion 3D printing, the best way for me to learn what was suitable for drafting a model as well as printing models, sanding them up and finishing them was constantly printing. I went through my whole first reel making mini Gatling guns and other stuff for friends just to have an idea of it falling out of alignment and fixing it again. The SparkMaker as well as UV reactive 3D printing is a very similar story, and I'm just going absolutely flat chat and enjoying the whole process. To bust a few myths, if you are doing smaller models and hollow, the material, if it is available to you locally, is not as expensive as I feared, probably only about 3 times more than additive printing, and you can't control how much material you'll have in the model if you're cutting it itself. This is the completed Sonichu model. It is not perfect, but through this unusual design and being a character figure, I've learnt quite a bit about supports. Some areas I didn't quite catch with a support peg, and it's sandwiched or pancaked to the point where it started self-forming and attached itself to other parts of the model. This is not really going to be a display or competition piece, so not too concerned. But other tiny and really fine detail like the nose and how thin the tail stands out and attaches, as well as it being able to stand on its own limbs, is pretty impressive. With a base, a top heavy model is absolutely printable, and as long as you've got enough supports underneath the feet and holding the whole thing together, I've learnt doing other heavy prints, it can collapse and just fall into the resin tank. In the way of sanding it up, you can just prime it and go painting. The larger the surface area, the more noticeable and flat the stepping will be. A little sanding can occur, but a couple of layers of primer and straight to paint will fix that, or primer and sanding. So all of that aside, to design your own models and 3D print them with a cheaper SLA 3D printer, or download them or commission someone and printing it yourself, is very sustainable. It's quite enjoyable, and I absolutely am thrilled that it got this far. This is probably as much information as within my expertise that I can share on the subjects, the more advanced, on the beginner scale of this sort of 3D printing. I'll do updating other models, definitely a lot of tanks. One video has been lined up and there's just all these models out there that does not exist in 70-second injection molded box kits. It's also a lot cheaper, and they're just very quick to build and paint. A few of those will come out where I'll be able to adjust and refine doing that sort of 3D printing for diorama models or just standalone tank models, and maybe one or two more character figures or other subjects that may tickle my fancy or pick up. That aside, I think I'll put this to a close and just focus using the technology more so for mold making for the injection molding video. Those videos will continue once tooling is built up to the point where I can show off what I've gathered. Things are a bit tight on time. Also, the creation of aftermarket parts to glue to Gundams and other kits as an alternative to castable resin. Thank you very much for watching. As always, until next time, stay tuned for further content. I've got this pretty awesome Sonichu toy model kit to put on the desk, and that's all about it. The files for the model is in the description down below, and we'll catch you guys next time. See you later.